experts and authorities in education are going to support us to online, and the others here in the room. I'm going to introduce each panelist in order of their statement. I'm going to first introduce them, and I will first give the floor to Pablo Ceballos Estarellas. He is the regional director for the Office of Latin America and the Caribbean of UNESCO, and he is remotely connected. Pablo, you have the floor.
Estimados, pequeños
Bueno, estos son los problemas.
These are the problems that we have to deal with in hybrid meetings. We understand what students faced every day throughout the pandemic when we had to face these kinds of situations.
¿Puedes, Pablo?
Pablo, can you connect? We could also start with Noam's presentation, just in the interest of time. Noam, you have the floor.
No. Okay, now you can hear me. Okay. I don't need to translate myself. Yeah, great to be here. Thank you so much. It's a great opportunity to be here on such a wonderful panel. And what I'm hoping we can really discuss today is we've been hearing a lot about the education crisis. And here we have some really exciting solutions with some evidence and some scalability. So I think there is an exciting agenda today. So I'm speaking on behalf of Youth Impact, which is an organization that is scaling up evidence in health and education, and then also with a hat of doing some research with the University of Oxford on these interventions. So happy to jump to the next slide. If it will cooperate. Okay, well, it's a very nice logo. Well, I actually know what I want to say, so I can keep going while we figure out the slides. So one thing, as we all know, actually, we'll take this out for a second. One thing we all know, oh, okay, it's coming from the computer. Okay. One thing we all know is that COVID was a historic crisis. Over 1 billion children were out of school at the height of the pandemic. I think this is something we all know, and as mentioned, the learning losses were very large. And so one question was, how do you reach students when they're out of school? And governments and organizations turn to many approaches, and some of them and many of them involve some form of technology, and often these were sometimes high-tech, internet-based technology, and in other cases they were lower tech, like radio, TV, and in some cases even just using a simple mobile phone, which we don't always think about as a technology, but is actually one of the oldest, most accessible technologies of all. And so that's going to be a theme, is using some of these low-tech approaches, and I think we're seeing here the value of low-tech in particular, even as we're here together. And so one of the goals was really staying connected with students during this time where it was very hard to connect with them. So I'm going to share a little bit about some of my experience from a kind of global context and then connect the dots to some of the work happening in Latin America and the Caribbean from some of the first evidence during the pandemic on remote learning. So that's some context. And I'm actually going to just skip through these because I already talked about this. So what was the intervention that I'm going to refer to? It was actually very simple. There was a mobile phone-based text message once a week. And then the other component of it was a 20-minute phone call once a week. So it was a very simple, cheap, scalable intervention. This was tested in a randomized control trial, which is considered some of the most reliable evidence. And we also assessed students to make sure that all of the instruction was targeted to their level. So the children who couldn't do addition were taught addition. The children who couldn't do subtraction were taught subtraction. So what is the evidence? I'm going to cut to the chase. So this is actually, if you can go back one slide here. So this is a few of the countries in the research that I was directly involved in the first instance. 5 studies, actually it's 5 additional beyond the original study, 20,000 students, 500 educators, just to give you the sense of the scope. So this wasn't a small thing in one place. Actually, this was across many contexts, many students, and really tested at quite a scale. Happy to go to the next one. So I'm going to cut to the chase and tell you what we're finding across all of these studies. And so the first evidence from Botswana made a big splash because it was some of the world's first evidence. It was published in Nature Human Behavior. And now this is from the 5 follow-on studies. And so the paper will be released soon. It's not yet released, so you're one of the first to see this, actually. And here's what we're seeing. The bottom line is it actually worked in every country. And on average, it delivered the equivalent of over a year of high-quality instruction per $100. That is extremely cost-effective. It's one of the most cost-effective education approaches that I've actually ever been involved in or seen. The other thing that you can see here that I'll sort of express is we also tested it when delivered by NGOs and when delivered by governments. And it worked just as well, in fact, slightly better when delivered by governments, which we don't always see. So this can really work across countries and within government systems. This is another figure here. And I won't dig into the data, but I'm very happy to if anyone wants to chat about it after. I'll just tell you the bottom line. One thing we saw is that this both recovered the learning loss, which we heard about, but it actually did something even more remarkable. It actually improved education outcomes over pre-COVID learning, actually, to the point where it delivered more learning than a full year of education. And this was 20 minutes once a week for 8 weeks. So in 3 hours, children learned more than sometimes they learn in an entire year. So this is pretty striking. And I think the main takeaway here is, on the one hand, it's very hard to improve learning. And in many situations, learning is not where it needs to be. On the other hand, it's very possible, actually, to improve learning. This is something we can do, and we can do at scale. So how do we really bridge the gap? So a couple of policy implications, and I'll close. So one is around cost effectiveness. This is, of course, critical for policy. Another is really bringing rigorous evidence at a time of uncertainty, especially around scalable approaches. Another is I want to talk about tech for a second. We've been referring to this as remote tutoring, but often there's large tech budgets in government, as we know, but they're used on giving out tablets or computers. One other way of thinking about utilizing those line items is using technology that people already have access to, like a mobile phone, and they're using, and then actually delivering good pedagogy through that. So that's not a use of ICT line items that's typically seen, but it could be possible. Another point is on targeting instruction. This is something that's been shown to work in many settings. This is another way to do this to children's levels. And we were just talking actually about curriculum and aligning curriculum to students' levels. This is another way of doing that. Another is around tutoring. Tutoring is one of the single most effective approaches in education, and this is a low-cost, cheap way of doing tutoring. And I think that's been a main thrust of some of the work that we've seen with IDB and governments in Latin America. And then just the final point here on school disruption. I think this has really opened our eyes to the fact that it's not that uncommon, actually. So actually there was just big floods in Pakistan that disrupted schooling for tens of thousands of students. Rainy seasons disrupt school. Teacher strikes disrupt school. So we need to think about building resilient education systems even beyond the pandemic. So I'll just wrap up. And parent engagement. Of course, this is critical. The COVID shock was a real eye-opener on how we can engage caregivers and parents, and often these approaches were calling households and parents directly and engaging them in the process. So I'll just wrap up. I can go through these quickly. There's a real movement building around this. So a lot of institutions have put this kind of approach in reports, and now really one of the key aspects is how do we operationalize it at scale. We sort of have a sense that this can work. There's a coalition building. And the IDB, very excited to be here with governments and ministries, and the IDB has really been collaborating and pushing this forward. And we're going to hear today from a few efforts, actually, which have shown to be really effective. And it's very exciting what this effort is doing. So thank you, everyone, and very excited for the conversation that's going to happen today.
Thank you so very much, Noam. I actually,
I will go back to using Spanish. With the technical problem that we were having at the beginning, I didn't have the opportunity to introduce Noam. He's a fellow at the Oxford University, and also is the co-founder of Young Impact. We've seen precisely the experiences that they've been implementing in different countries throughout the world. Thank you very much, Noam, for sharing the work that you have done in the different areas that we are working together as well. I'd like to highlight very quickly some ideas. The impact of the project, not only to recover or make up for lost time during the pandemic, but also to solve learning problems that you had identified before the pandemic. So it's a combination of resolving structural and temporary problems, and this has precisely, I think, been very useful. Also, a very important element is something that wasn't mentioned by Noam, but I think we should highlight it here. There is a combination of abilities, of skills. I think, have this idea that it's a false dilemma, I think, that we tend to focus basic skills above social and emotional skills. And I think this is one of the reasons why these projects are so effective, because they support cognitive development and social emotional development and executive skills as well. They help students organize their time. And I think this is extremely important in this type of project. There's flexibility along with the use of new technologies. Flexibility because it's something that can be done in person or online. And something else that Noam highlighted about the role of homes, which we know is very important in the education of young people and children. Now I will give the floor to, I'm going to see if it works, I'm going to give the floor to Pablo Ceballos Estarellas.